that there's three kinds of biblical scholarship, and they include source, form, and redaction. So source, you just got to find out it's like listing an index of what are the sources available. Form is to establish the historical events and characters that led to the events of his life. So that's a little bit like socio-historical study. And then redaction criticism is when you start comparing the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John side by side. That's called the synoptic gospels. And then they start figuring out, oh, they've all three drawn from a source that we call Q, that John's Jesus looks like this, Matthew's Jesus looks like this. We knew that he was hanging out, like who's hanging out with Gnostics. We can tell through the Jesus they provide, right? And so you end up with multiple Jesuses. You get this mosaic. Now, as that stuff diversified over time, there was a backlash. And there were people who wanted to say, you know what, like, let's just step back from the mosaic, and I can give you a nice picture of who this guy was, and we can agree on basic elements of a life. And there were other people who said, quit doing source, form, and redaction. Every word in the Bible is inerrant. Every word is truth. And so you're doing the wrong thing with the Bible when you try to bring the tools of the Enlightenment and reason and argument to the task. This is a mystery, it is divine, and every word is the truth. And so those kinds of backlashes have happened. Those are not, particularly that kind of a fundamentalism is not part of biblical scholarship, because it doesn't play by the rules of scholarship. All right, so as the book shifts from its discussion of biblical scholarship to history, you can also see the influence of form criticism, because our author is providing the socio-historical context of the apostolic age, the age that runs from the Pentecost to the close of the first century, as PR discusses around page 200. So by understanding this context of the apostolic age, we learn more about the production of the Gospels. So that's how form criticism works. Now, when you step back and think about what that first century entailed, there are many folks living in our time who would say that 9/11 changed everything. Well, in the same way, you can imagine first century Judaism was undergoing a massive transformation of its expectation about a worldview. So on the one hand, you always had a tradition regarding a Jewish Messiah who would come and make everything right. And so when Jesus appears, then there's these questions. Is this the guy, right? It's the Matrix question, I suppose. Is this the one? And then he causes enough trouble among the priestly hierarchy of Judaism that he is crucified as an enemy of Caesar. And shortly thereafter, however, the apostles experience the Pentecost, and they shift from being kind of hiding themselves into witnessing to, and a population of people is listening to a message about what was the meaning of that crucifixion, and was it a divine meaning? Okay, so if you can imagine after a crucifixion, think about something that would have hit our culture with that kind of question, because it's mundane, right? He's up there being killed with two other guys who are criminals. So there's a mundanity to it. And so just to try to be a little bit humorous here, if you can imagine in the confusion of that, if we had a dialogue where, okay, so the first guy says, no, that Jewish guy who got killed with some criminals? Yeah, well, he was the Messiah and the kingdom is at hand. Right? Because the Messiah is not supposed to be killed. That would be very unmessianic of his Messiah. So in confusion, somebody's going to respond, well, I'm still oppressed under Roman rule. It's not looking Messiah-ish to me. And then in our traditions, when the Messianic age arrives, the deaf shall hear, the blind shall see, and nation shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. That's what our texts tell us will signal the arrival of a Messiah. And the death of that guy has not signaled that. And so first guy said, well, wait, he brought a new covenant. It's for everybody, not just Jews. And his death was the sacrifice by which the new covenant was established. Don't you get it? His death is the divine moment. It is the new covenant. We are supposed to start beating our swords into plowshares now. It happened, don't you see? Right? And that's crazy talk. What kind of Jew are you? Like, are the deaf hearing? Are the blind seeing? Are the nations stopped warring? It's not looking... and, you know, so people are trying to make sense. No, seriously, it's like Abraham and Isaac, only this time the child does get sacrificed, and because he does, then a new covenant gets made. Right? Then 37 years later, about, so let's say that's 33 with the crucifixion, 37 years later, the temple is destroyed. Right? So can you imagine these two guys coming back into a conversation again? Like the entire sanctity of the world was just undone. The Holy of Holies is gone. The place we made for God is gone. It's destroyed. Yeah, like what's up with that? Let's go over to Stephen's house. He's still talking crazy talk about a new covenant. Want to go hear what he says? Right? Like, so after the sanctity of the world is undone, then the message about who Christ was might have more ears wanting to hear, because a world has been unmade. It is time to remake a world. This is a big deal. So you remember from our Judaism section, this after the destruction of the Second Temple is when the rabbinic period starts. So in this first century, you're going to have the earliest stages of people beginning to let go of temple sacrifice and develop instead prayer and in the home and the rabbinic culture and the writing down of their sacred texts. And so there's folks in that milieu saying, was the divine and was not. Now, so by the 4th century, Constantine's empire has adopted Christianity, transformed it, no longer oppressed. Now it's the mantle of the empire. Now this, if we think about the axial age again, right? So around that 1st century, we know that over in Buddhism and Hinduism, we have these urban centers and priestly classes and anti-Brahmanic heterodox movements and the establishment of doctrine and great texts. And so here we are, 1st century, an axial age. The Romans have, the Roman Empire adopts Christianity. This is prime time for the establishment of a religious hierarchy, bishops, priests, all of those kinds of things. It fits into that heuristic tool of the axial age, that this would be a time for establishing doctrine and hierarchy. Now, we can't hardly go into it. It's all covered in the written lecture. But if you think about this as the world of the Roman Empire at the time, when you hear about Arius coming from northern Africa up to Nicene, and all right, this is Ephesus, and Nicaea's over here. I've got one more map for you. We think of Arius's counterpoint, Athanasius. Let me look at my notes, okay? Can I do that? Arius in northern Rome, and Athanasius of Alexandria. Good, got that right. All right, I just didn't want to steer you wrong. So from Arius of northern Africa and then Athanasius of Alexandria, these guys are going to head up. Let's look at this guy. That's not actually what I wanted. This is the one I wanted. So these guys are coming through Syria. There's Syria. And here we have Nicaea, Chalcedon, Constantinople, and Ephesus. So think about what this meant for the travel needs and the significance of text and doctrine as people are traveling across, right? You know that wasn't an easy trip to make and come out alive. But these people are gathering and talking. This fits quite nicely of an axial age. All right, so we have the first two, Athanasius and Arius, arguing about whether Jesus was divine or whether Jesus was a human. Because for Arius, it's real simple. You got one God. As soon as you start saying you got more than one God, you got polytheism. We are monotheists. We have one God, and we have a special guy, but he's a guy named Jesus Christ. Whereas the others, Athanasius wins the day. He picks a baptismal creed that was developed in Syria as the foundation for the new creed and creates the Nicene Creed that says one substance, they are two persons, one substance. And that wins the day for that council. Next, later, even in the same century, we then end up with the next two guys, Cyril and Nestorius. And this argument comes from, all right, so if you said that Christ is both human and divine, then what are we calling his mama? Is she a God bearer or is she a Christ bearer? And Nestorius wants to say we need to keep that human element of the Christ figure in the picture. And so please will everyone call his mother Christokos, because that indicates to us the priority of his humanness as essential and part of his character. But whereas Cyril, who's a very nice writer, you could read his letter back to Nestorius here. It's actually quite interesting. And he says, no, she is a God bearer. She will be Theotokos. And Cyril wins the day on that one. What we learn from this whole wrangling through those councils is that as soon as you try to put into words, don't be surprised that every gathering of religious people is a gathering about contestation and ritual space sharing that is not necessarily about agreement. Don't be surprised that religious traditions, when they start getting particular about details, they start getting mad. Because trying to relate human being to language about a divine creates gaps, paradoxes, and mysteries, and people are going to argue about it. So I want you to leave this class as citizens able to make sense out of religion out there. And here we go. We're coming out of our Christianity, being able to understand. You can pin it down into words. It doesn't mean people will follow you. Then once you pin it down into words, then those words start splitting up. All right, so what's Christ's nature, and how do we call his mother something, because she's the link now between a divine force and a human being that is both divine and human. And so the details is where you should never be surprised that religious traditions will find contestation. Thanks for listening.